Do you remember just how crazy the culture was back in 2020? Sometimes I don't even remember nowadays, but in case you forgot, let me just remind you of a few things. Let's flash back to 5 years ago. If you didn't support defunding the police at a time when people were rioting and looting all across the country, you would be called a racist and you would be canceled. If you just so happened to be white and said that you were proud of your culture, you would be called a Nazi and you would be canceled. If you had the political belief that we shouldn't be allowing in millions of illegal immigrants, you would be called xenophobic. They would say you hate immigrants and you would be canceled. If you opposed the growing number of men in women's sports and drag queens in schools, you would be called transphobic. They would say you hate LGBTQ and you would be canceled. And worst of all, if you didn't want to be forced to inject a government-mandated biosubstance into your body or the body of your children, you would be called a science denier, you would be called uneducated, you would be called a conspiracy theorist, you would be likely kicked out of school and work, and, of course, you would be canceled. For years, that was the cultural tyranny that we lived under, and everyone just accepted it. Everyone was beaten down, essentially. It was a time when you would be canceled, deplatformed, or ostracized from polite society for having any viewpoint on any social or cultural issue that deviated in any way from the woke orthodoxy. If you dared to break with the militant left on any of those issues, even if you might agree with the left on other issues like economics, for example, these people would use every tactic in the book to shame you into silence and expel you from any institution you were previously a part of. Shit, I've literally been called a self-hating Asian. And don't get me wrong, a lot of people on the so-called left still do this. They still try to coerce you and get you to shut up. They still call you this name and that name to try to cancel you. They still throw around the same terms and labels, almost like they have Tourette's. Racist, fascist, Nazi, racist, fascist, Nazi. I mean, literally, there's some left-wing commentators that I watch that can't go a few sentences without saying one of those words. It's genuinely insulting to people who actually have Tourette's syndrome and repeat the same things over and over again. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that it seems like somewhere along the way, people en masse collectively realized that these kinds of words hold no weight anymore. They've just been abused and misused so much that they have no real meaning anymore. Nowadays, no one cares if some emotional freak calls you a quote-unquote racist. No one really cares if you say something edgy or controversial, politically incorrect even. And most of the time, thankfully, you won't get canceled for it like you would have in the past. It seems like at some point, and I'll get to this a bit later, society just decided that, why don't we have real discussions on the basis of the actual ideas of our positions, instead of bowing down to every accusation of the woke mob, which literally only exists for the purpose of shutting down conversations on anything that doesn't fit their narrative. But fast forward, now it's 2025, and everyone can see that things have changed a lot. Nowadays, we have racist memes on Instagram Reels, Nick on the Tucker Carlson podcast, conspiracy theories, whether right or wrong, just spreading everywhere over every major political event. And for better or worse, you can be the judge of that. It's clear that the Overton window is expanding. On both sides, actually. On the far right, for example, race realism and white identity. On the far left, actual socialism and communism. And it now seems like we live in a world where more and more people are able to say what they want nowadays. You can even tell that with myself. In the past, I didn't dare talk about a lot of the issues that I talk about, but now I feel a little bit more emboldened to, just because of the changing socio-political climate. Shit, nowadays, you still have to be somewhat careful with it, but you're even able, to some extent, to criticize certain groups of people that were previously not allowed to be criticized whatsoever. And honestly, this trend of anti-wokeness is really one of the few things in society and politics that actually gives me a lot of hope in the future and should give you hope as well. Because obviously there's a lot of bad things going on in the world. A lot of people, especially in Gen Z, just have this existential fear and dread about where things are going, how our futures are going to shape up. But if there's one thing that does give me hope in the future, it's that people are finally waking up and coming out of this trance of the whole politically correct era. Because what a lot of people don't know, and what I'm going to talk about, is that there was something dark and nefarious about wokeness and cancel culture that has ruined society for the past decade or so. What more and more people are starting to realize nowadays, even many people on the left or formerly on the left, is that the entire radical left cultural agenda was a tool used by corporations and elites to keep themselves in power and keep them exploiting you. And I hope this part of the video reaches some reasonable, intelligent, open-minded people on the so-called left. Because people who typically consider themselves on the left are all about things like, supporting the working class, and they talk about class consciousness, going up against the billionaires, the elites, the oligarchy. But what you need to understand is that those elite ruling class institutions are the ones who push this woke identity politics cultural agenda in the first place. Because this goes way back to 2008. I was barely even aware of politics at the time. Many of you watching this probably were also in the same boat, but if you'll do a little digging, you'll find that the main thing going on at the time was the Occupy Wall Street movement after the financial crisis, the Great Recession. Long story short, people en masse were tired of being scammed, tired of being exploited by the banks, tired of our money having gone to endless wars in the Middle East. And at the time, it seemed like there was the possibility of real grassroots change. But if you know anything about history and even just psychology, whenever any ruling class senses a threat from the working class, the easiest way to neutralize that threat is by dividing that working class, turning them against each other. And that's how the woke movement was born. That's exactly what happened. After the financial crisis of '08, the elites noticed that the people weren't fighting each other, they were actually working together. And of course, they weren't wasting their time arguing about pronouns or microaggressions or getting mad at each other over cultural issues. It was one of the very few, if any, times in modern history where people were genuinely united against the banks, against Wall Street, against the political class, and people were standing side by side because they felt screwed over by the same system. And obviously, the elites hated that. The elites wanted that to stop. So what happened next? Well, for whatever strange reason, suddenly out of nowhere, the entire national conversation just so happened to shift away from class solidarity and towards identity warfare, aka the woke cultural agenda. Instead of the bank screwed everyone, the narrative became white people are the problem, men are the patriarchy, straight people are the problem. You're bigoted if you don't want unlimited numbers of illegal immigrants in the country. And it's crazy how every single institution, Hollywood, corporations, universities, news outlets, they all started pushing these talking points and these narratives and these agendas at the exact same time. Now, some more conspiratorial-minded people might say that these elites came up with this novel plan to unleash the woke mind virus onto the world. Some people might also say that this cultural agenda was already set in motion, especially by those of the left-wing academic class, and that these oligarchs just took advantage of the situation and decided to amplify that agenda for their own benefit. But either way, for whatever reason, you can't deny that it took the world by storm. Corporations and the government used it as a convenient distraction to keep the peasants fighting and keep themselves in power. Because out of nowhere, every Fortune 500 company became obsessed with race, gender, sexuality. But at the same time, you know what also happened? None of them raised wages. None of them decreased CEO salaries. None of them gave out more worker benefits. None of them improved retirement plans. They didn't do anything to actually benefit you. They just fed you ideas of, racial justice and equality. That sounded nice, but they didn't give you shit, except for making the country fight against each other on cultural lines. That used to be just agreed upon as common sense. And it wasn't just corporations. The government did the same exact thing to hold on to power. They gave endless speeches about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about marginalized communities. but they didn't lower healthcare costs, they didn't fix student debt, they didn't regulate Wall Street, they didn't address rent or homelessness, they didn't fix the crumbling infrastructure, they didn't stop inflation, they didn't cut defense budgets, but they did pass billions of dollars in corporate subsidies, they did deregulate and cut the corporate tax rate, they did approve more defense contracts and more bombings and more wars, they did keep sending our tax dollars overseas to our greatest ally, and this whole time, people were too busy screaming at each other to realize this, thanks to the woke culture war, which, if we're being totally honest, was primarily a war against men, but especially straight men, and especially straight white men. Because what do you do when the working class is threatening to rebel? You turn people against the demographic that makes up the majority of the working class. And who makes up the majority, the backbone of the working class? Straight white men. Are straight white men somehow the worst people in the world? I don't think so. You can debate that. But what they definitively were was the biggest threat to Wall Street, corporations, and the political ruling class at the time. That's why these elites turned everyone against this huge demographic. Now do you start to see the picture? At the end of the day, the past is the past, and here's what matters. People in 2025 are finally waking up. More and more of us have finally had enough. We've had enough of the wokeness and cancel culture controlling every aspect of society and of our personal lives, while at the same time, the people in power use that chaos to distract the population and extract money, resources, and influence for themselves. But again, that era is finally coming to an end, and you can see it everywhere. You can see it in the trends, even since last year, because like him or not, Trump winning in 2024 wasn't just a political victory. It was a cultural mandate against wokeness. It was a message from millions of Americans saying that we're done with this nonsense. We should have the freedom to talk about whatever we want, and using that freedom, we should focus on the actual issues at hand, instead of the artificial ones turning one identity against another, especially, like I said, against straight white men who make up the majority of the working class. Another thing that really helped in all this, again, like him or not, was Elon Musk buying Twitter. At the very least, it broke the censorship machine and kind of reopened the public square. It allowed for a free flow of discussions and media. And once people were allowed to talk freely again, the whole narrative started changing. People aren't as scared as they used to be. More and more people are sharing edgy memes or giving controversial opinions. No one's really screaming at each other about pronouns and microaggressions like they used to. In 2025, you likely won't be canceled for a tweet you made 10 years ago. And the beautiful thing in all this is that ever since the culture war started taking a backseat, many people on both the left and the right are starting to find common ground on certain positions and even notice the same things. We all think that housing prices are way too high and that especially usury is a problem nowadays. We all think that we shouldn't be giving billions of our tax dollars to a country that's currently committing you-know-what. And we all think that certain files need to be released. And we're all indignant at the fact that our country is being ruled by these kinds of criminals. But it's only now that the chains of cancel culture and wokeness are starting to break, that people on the left and the right are beginning to find this common ground and beginning to have some sort of solidarity over core and fundamental issues like these. And like I said before, even in this crazy and chaotic world that we live in, that sometimes even just feels like a simulation or some shit, this is one of the few things that gives me hope. And yeah, I'm sure there will always be some radical nut jobs who think that if you don't support mass illegal immigration, then you're somehow a complete racist or something. But over time, it seems like those voices are now starting to become few and far between, because people realize that we have way more important issues at hand, and that those issues in the first place were drummed up by people who want to keep us divided. So as long as it stays this way, as long as we don't go back to the era of cultural tyranny from before, as long as we keep having these honest conversations openly and without the ridiculous name-calling, as long as we keep talking about issues that both the left and the right can agree on, then maybe we truly do have something of a path forward. As always, thanks so much for watching. I hope you got something new out of this video. I really don't hear anyone else in the media saying it from this perspective, so that's what I'm here for. I'm going to try to explain these things in the way that I see them, in the best way that I can. And it seems like most of you guys understand as well. As you guys know, I'm trying to do things very differently on this channel. That's why I don't take any sponsorships. I don't try to sell you online courses. I don't do affiliate links in the description or just any of that stuff that most influencers do nowadays. You know, I'm not part of the 7K club, if you know what that means. But because of that, I obviously don't make a lot of money from this. So really the only way that I can continue this channel long term is through your support, your voluntary support. As in, if you've ever gotten any sort of value from my channel, a unique perspective you've never thought about, something new you've learned, or if any of my videos have inspired you in some way, I'd really appreciate if you choose to support the channel. And there are two ways to do that if you'd like. You can join us over on Patreon, where there's actually just so much stuff. You can talk to me one-on-one, open up a conversation about really anything. You can chat with other people in our community chat. We've got some really interesting discussions going on there too. And by now, I've got like a whole year's worth of just bonus content on there. Videos, posts, stories, miscellaneous behind-the-scenes stuff that isn't on this channel, obviously, and even some full-length exclusive videos too. All of that literally for less than the price of a cup of coffee nowadays, and your support goes directly towards supporting the channel so that I can continue doing this. Or if you don't want to go through the hassle of getting on a completely different platform, that's totally fine. You can still support the channel right here on YouTube through channel memberships. With that, you'll get access to the entire archive of videos, which includes a bunch of previous videos that were more personal and in-depth, some of them even cringe, that I decided to make private for that reason, because there's some stuff that I felt like I overshared and shouldn't be telling the whole internet about. But if you're a channel member, you'll be able to watch all of that. It's a lot of bonus content, along with the tens of hours of full-length live streams that I previously did. If you're new here, I do live streams every once in a while, which everyone can watch obviously, but I just make them private afterwards. But all channel members can always watch those at any time. Watch me in real time answer some very interesting questions that I've gotten. I might do another one at 75K, by the way. And of course, as a channel member, you get that little badge by your name in the comments, which is pretty cool. It ensures that I'll almost never miss your comments. And finally, as always, just gotta plug the second channel, which I've been slacking on a little bit recently, but I do have new content coming out for that, so stay tuned.